gave us notice that he's not coming to it with the other one, but I think it was this one.
So we're gonna give him the credit of good notice on that one?
Yeah.
All right. All right, and in addition, on behalf of the commission and staff, I'd like to welcome our colleagues from the former Water Supply Advisory Committee, as well as all the members of the public who monitored the activities of the Water Supply Advisory Committee for those many years. Thanks so much for all your work and for your continuing engagement in the water supply augmentation strategy that's underway right now. Tonight, for item 3 on the agenda, you are honorary members of the Water Commission, after which you're free to excuse yourself, and I encourage you to do so, because it's going to get really dry after that. Just drier. No pun. By way of just a little bit of logistics, this is not our normal meeting room. We don't have amplification available for everybody, so we're going to use our big kid voices. For folks from the audience or members of the public who are going to speak, we do have a mic that we can pass around, and if you find you can't hear people, please let us know that you can. We are recording the meeting and using what has been described to me as some pretty cool technology that will actually synchronize the presentation with the slides, so that when it's posted online, you'll be able to actually track the prezo that happened here, or if folks missed it, they'd be able to get caught up pretty quickly. So that should help us a little bit. And with that, I would like to invite any members of the public who would like to speak in form of oral communications. This is your opportunity to speak to the commission about anything that's not on the agenda for tonight. Will be, I have one. Do I have 2? Or?
I would.
We have 2. Okay, so we are managing the clock a little differently tonight. We're going to offer you 3 minutes each. We don't have our delightful lights and buzzers this time. So instead, Katie has little colored cards that she's going to hold up. She's going to time you using her cell phone. A yellow card means you have about 30 seconds to go, and a red card means you're out of time. I really would like to suggest that the 3-minute limit is something that's real and is a matter of respect to other members of the public, to the staff, to the commission, to the committee, people who are spending their time here tonight. And it's also a matter of fairness. So please abide by the 3 minutes. I mean, your 3 minutes are up. If you're not done, please stop. You're always welcome to submit additional comments in writing, and the commission will take a look at it. So with that, I saw Bruce's hand first. So would you like to go ahead? Thanks.
Where should I stand? Okay.
Anywhere you want. Do you need a mic or want a mic?
It's not.
Okay.
I can talk loud.
There you go.
I want to talk to you about SGMA tonight. That's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's a state law that got passed a few years ago that required every basin that's higher or medium in the state to produce a plan to make their basin sustainable and the groundwater sustainable, and then to implement that plan over a period of 20 years. That's kind of the law. And I want to fill you in on some of the details about that, some of the things that is not in the law that has been stated sometimes. I'm a member of the Aqua Groundwater Management Group, and that meets every quarter. And in that meeting, the state board often is there, and DWR is often there. So you hear some things about what their plans are. And one of the things that they have said about their plans is that naturally, we're going to look at the plan and make sure the plan actually does lead to sustainability. And probably there will be many of them that actually do. There will be lots of problems. And they said that if the plan is not sustainable, then they are required by law to take over the basin, basically come in and solve the problem that the locals did not solve. And then is a requirement by the state board. The state board has said, since they're it'll be really complicated, with lots of them probably, and they can't go in and understand the basin in great detail. So what they're going to do is just go into the basin and do ration. So everyone cut off, and that's their solution. Which means that even though all the agencies that are part of those agencies needs to look out for their own issues, They also need to look at the joint issue, because if that fails, everyone's going to be cut back, and there'll be no additional pumping ground, certainly. And that would harm everyone in the basin, so that's something to consider.
Thank you. My name's Becky Steinbruner. I'm a resident of rural Aptos and a customer of a small water company in the hills of Aptos. I am here tonight to let you all know that I am taking legal action against Soquel Creek Water District for the faulty EIR that was conducted for the Pure Water Soquel project. This is case 19CV00181. It is currently scheduled to be heard in Santa Cruz County Superior Court sometime after June 19th. The date has been pushed back a bit to assist me. I'm doing this in pro per, and I'm collecting the administrative record, which is voluminous, so it has just been agreed that I will get a bit of additional time to assemble this very extensive record. I want to let you know that I'm taking this action in pro per because I am so concerned about the possible implications of this project, and that I feel it is truly unnecessary, giving a possible for regional water transfers and regional cooperation with the city of Santa Cruz and the district, that we could very handily take care of this problem. So that is why I'm taking this, and I really saw a lot of flaws in the EIR. I would like to read, until I run out of time, the actions. There are 8 causes of action. The first action is multiple violations of CEQA, including inadequate analysis of impacts to groundwater quality and public health, inadequate analysis of alternatives, and failure to adequately respond to comments on the draft EIR. Second cause of action, violation of CEQA in that the EIR lacks full consideration and analysis of the no project alternative when surface water transfer pilot project is being implemented, and would support surface water transfers and a regional solution. Third cause of action, violation of CEQA in that the district certified the project EIR deficient in attention and consideration to areas of known controversy and issues to be resolved. And I will tell you, there is a move afoot that mimics what happened with the desal plant. There is a move afoot to put this item on the ballot. Fourth cause of action, violation of CEQA in that the district certified the EIR as complete and approved the project on December 18, 2018, despite new and significant information presented publicly at the meeting that had been previously withheld by Director Rachel Lather and members of the public, which included County Supervisor John Leopold, until that moment, and which could have altered the lead agency's decision-making, but of which were not included in the EIR analysis. Fifth cause of action, violation of CEQA in that the board abused discretionary powers by certifying the project EIR that is void of any comment on the draft EIR from significant trustee agencies. You may look at this document, case number 19CV00181. Thank you very much.
For members of the commission, non-honorary members of the commission, any statement of disqualification? And consent agenda? Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Mr. Chairman,
Sorry?
I have a question on page 1.1, which has to do with item 1. City
Not
council.
agenda.
Should be.
Should we pull one?
I have,
It's
it's a quick question.
Okay.
I was just curious why the bids were all rejected and what that had to do with.
Do you want to answer that question? Or I could answer it very brief. So there was some confusion about whether subconsultants had to be, or subcontractors had to be listed, and apparently some did and some didn't. So the idea was to pull back and we did a do-over. Right?
Thank you for that. So we have a motion and a second. Call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay, so then on to general business. Item 3, which is why you're up here. And again, welcome and thank you so much. So while this looks like an old WSAC meeting, and it definitely looked like an old WSAC meeting from the standpoint of the voluminous materials that were shared with everybody prior to the meeting, a little revisiting of the War and Peace reading that which Commissioner Baskin referred on a monthly basis. This is a regular Water Commission meeting, so we have a certain meeting profile and decorum that we need to follow, so we're going to try to do that, but at the same time, we are here to receive a lot of information from staff about the progress the city's been making on the water supply augmentation strategy that y'all drafted, that the city council accepted, and that we're trying to put into practice. And we're doing this in order to get your feedback on how we're doing and get any pointers you have about how to continue to move forward as we look to try to get this, bring forth some recommendations in the next few months. We're not making any decisions tonight, okay? This is a big receive information, bi-directional receive information meeting. So please feel free to share your thoughts. With respect to how we're going to try to run the meeting from a public perspective, again, there's a lot of information that we're going to be, that's going to be shared tonight. There will be an opportunity for public comment at the end of the item, but it's a long item. So in the meantime, as questions come up, I'm going to ask you to write them on index cards, which Nicole will be able to pass around and will collect, and Walt will collate, and we'll do our best to try to answer those in stream while we're going. At least the ones that seem to have some popularity or some immediate salience. All the questions will be addressed eventually. We're not going to lose any of these. But that way we hope we can keep things moving reasonably well as we get through all this material. So as thoughts come up while we're going through this, please look for Nicole, write legibly, if that's okay, and we'll try to address those. I think that's what I've got. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rosemary.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And as Doug said, we do have a lot of information to share tonight. Before we get into a presentation, which several of us are going to do parts of, I want to draw your attention to page 3.3. There is a section of that table on page 3.3 that says supplemental water supply for Soquel Creek Water District in lieu. This is some analysis that we did, and it says 300 MGD, 500 MGD, 1,500 MGD. Those are supposed to be acre feet per year, so please accept our correction of that information. Okay, so if you had a chance to look at the packet, you knew that there were sort of 8 segments of the packet that were laid out to kind of talk to you about where things are starting to change and what some things that are some information about why those things have changed. We're going to do our best because we could be here for a week or two if we went through all the details. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the packet, it is available online, and we will definitely answer questions as we go. But we're going to try to hit the highlights and tell you the story of what we think are the really key messages. And the backstory is, this. So to start out, we want to do, this is what our meeting objectives are for tonight. We want to provide a briefing on the progress done of the work today. We want to hear questions and receive feedback on our synthesis that you see at the end and some proposed next steps. We want to review with you, or at least talk to you about some early action options that are in the synthesis. We want to consider at a future meeting, we're not going to do this tonight, some adjustments to the WSAC work plan, particularly to the time frame, based on a kind of a one-step, two-step kind of a strategy based on some opportunities for early action. We want to consider some signposts for future, to guide future work, particularly as it relates to climate change and some triggers. There was a memo kind of in the back that talked about some sort of sensitivity analyses and some sort of trigger threshold kinds of analyses we want to delve into more deeply. And then we want to discuss the path forward for additional discussions. I'm pretty sure that this is coming back as a possible action item or maybe a further discussion item in the at the June meeting of the Water Commission, so stay tuned. It probably will be on additional agendas as well over the next few months. And ultimately, we'll be wanting to brief the City Council on this, but we want to really have a good, robust community conversation before we go there. So that's what the agenda is. Any questions before I move forward on this? Okay, so since there are a lot of you who sat in this room and others like it, week in and week out, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, we had the Water Supply Advisory Committee. It was prefaced in some work that used before I got here in 2014 in October and November of 2013, where the council made some decisions to convene the group. You all put in applications. The council made appointments in February. And we started an 18-month process where we got to know each other very well and ate a lot of cake too, I guess, during the next year and a half. In November of 2015, we brought the council your recommendations, and the council accepted them and gave us direction to implement the work plan, which is what we've been doing for 3 years now. There you all are. Charlie and Peter weren't in that picture, but that was the last day. And just like I'm going to France tomorrow, I was going to Africa the day after this one. So I don't know if that means anything, but there you go. Go ahead, Heidi. This was your problem statement. Limited storage is our key problem. Fish flow requirements and potential climate change are having impacts on our available supply. We had a resulting peak season gap of 1.2 billion gallons in the worst hydrologic years. And water conservation alone was not enough. So that was your problem statement. And your recommendations were to do some additional conservation, which I don't know if Toby's really responsible for what's happened to demand, but you can take credit for it. And explore the feasibility of winter water harvest or the water transfers, water exchanges. I think in here it's also described in other places in the presentation as groundwater storage options. Looking at opportunities for transfers and exchanges with other regional groundwater agencies, and then explore the feasibility of recycled water and desal. And so we've been working pretty darn hard on all three of these areas over the last 3 years, and we have a lot to report. So basically, I think there's two big changes, and one of them I just mentioned, which was the demand that Toby's going to talk about in a minute. But in addition to the, let's move to the climate change, we have several additional climate change scenarios that we've been looking at. So we have a climate change scenario that Sean Chartrand developed, which is the middle one, the kind of orangish one. The colors, those color maps don't mean anything. When I first saw these, I thought blue, cold, orange, hot, red, but that's not what they mean. So GFDL 2.1, that's the climate change scenario we had during the Water Supply Advisory Committee process. The core model ensemble, which is the orangish one, that's a more recent one that's been developed for us by Sean Chartrand. And then the red one over here, which is called historical catalog, is the climate change scenario that's been developed by the groundwater sustainability planning process and the work that's been going on in the Santa Cruz Mid-County groundwater basin. So of those three, the driest one and the most significantly sort of dramatically departing from where our historical climate is the GFDL 2.1 one that we used in the WSAC. The more moderate one is the middle one, which is the 4 model ensemble, and the historical catalog is kind of between those two. So we know that's 3 different ways of looking at it, and you're going to see a lot of data both in the packet, and tonight you're going to see lots of different information showing these various climate models and what they say to us about how much water is available and what kind of sizing of infrastructure we would need under the various options. Go ahead. And I'm going to turn this to Toby now.
Okay, good evening everyone, nice to see some familiar faces. One of the key inputs, as you'll recall, in the process that we went through over the 18-month period that was used and also in modeling was the future of water demand. And we hired David Mitchell to look and do a water demand analysis and then to prepare a projection for us, which was later reduced somewhat by the work that we did on the conservation plan. But this was the future that was put into various models and what you had to work with. And you can see in this, when the Water Supply Advisory Committee was in place, we were in a water shortage emergency. That was happening. That's that big downturn in 2014. And you can see the discontinuity between where demand was and where we forecast it would go into 15 years, 20 years into the future. We needed that also for the state's urban water management plan, so we had that product prepared for us. Next slide, please. And so what has happened? Rosemary declared an end of the drought in late 2015, and since then, our total annual demands have remained at drought levels. And our peaks are not what they were in the past. We were looking at a future of about 3.2 billion gallons per year at some point when we were sort of fully recovered under normal economic conditions and normal weather. And 2016, 17, and 18, we've been producing total annual volumes more like 2.6 billion gallons per year. So it's a significant difference, and we wanted to explore that. We made some assumptions in the long-range financial plan about what our sales were, which are important to financing some of the improvements we're talking about. And again, we have this large discontinuity as we move forward to implement some of the recommendations. That's something we needed to address. So we hired David Mitchell back this winter to explore that, and that's attachment 2 in your packet tonight. If you didn't get a chance to read it, his analysis is contained in that. David did two things. He did a long-range forecast, but he also put together a kind of 5-year, what does recovery look like? And that's the forecast that he's comparing in his analysis. Next slide, please. So this is my contribution to modern art. But the blue years are 2013 and before. This is a picture of our daily demands. It's like vital signs, right? Our peak demand in the summertime used to be as high as 14 or more million gallons a day. And since 2014, shown in red, we're seeing our total loads lowered in the winter to about 6 million gallons per day, and in the summer to between 8 and 9 millions of gallons a day. And so the question is this some new normal? And what does it mean? What does it mean to sizing facilities? What does it mean to the gap that you all solved for? What does it mean, and how should we think about it going forward? Next slide, please. One thing that David Mitchell is he compared, I don't expect you to look at this and interpret it up here on the screen, but what he did, I'll say it verbally, he compared us and our sort of lag in rebounding to other Bay Area water utilities. And we are definitely lagging compared to some rebound that you're seeing going on around the state of California. Next slide. So the answer, which is contained in Appendix 2, is he looked at several factors, and one of the factors that explains why our demands are lower is fewer new accounts are being added than were projected in his long-range plan, which was based on the city's general plan and other documents. And as you know, we accounted for a certain number of new homes, new businesses, new multifamily dwellings, but there's quite a bit less going on than was forecast. And that explained a portion, about a quarter of the difference between the forecast and what we're seeing. The majority of it, as you might expect, was due to changes in pricing and rate structure that were implemented after your committee was disbanded. And you all know that we've made some major changes, mostly to finance the improvements that we're talking about here tonight, as well as infrastructure reinvestment. And that's had a major effect on water demand. And David found that that explained about 60% of the difference. The two between growth and price explain most of the discrepancy. So I wanted to bring that to you. It's something that we need to think about as we get near to the next urban water management plan that has us looking from 2020 to 2040 again. And we're also in the department exploring what's going on down to the account level. And what I mean by that is we're looking at large accounts, small accounts, what's happening at all the accounts. We looked at our top 100 customers and are getting the stories about what they've done. One story that I want to refer to is our second largest customer that's happened since the Water Supply Committee was in effect, was Paso Tiempo Golf Course. Last year has gone mostly to recycled water from Scotts Valley. And that's a relatively recent change, but that is a change that we expect will keep going, and that's a change that dropped our peak last year. It was noticeable. And so I'm going to end there just to give Heidi a segue to recycled water that's work that's been done.
Thank you, Toby. So I just want to take a few minutes to remind us that in addition to the groundwater alternatives that the WSAC wanted us to pursue, we had these two other alternatives that were in the work plan, and we agreed to work on simultaneous with the groundwater solutions. So first, recycled water. This was a joint project between the water department and the public works department. And the overall goal of the project was to find beneficial use for the wastewater. This is a little bit different than the goal of a water supply, and you'll see that in our recommended alternatives that we came up with. Stakeholders, we worked with the County of Santa Cruz, Soco Creek Water District, and Scotts Valley Water District. And we worked with Henry Jenks, who developed the recycled water feasibility planning study between 2016, and we finalized this last year. We vetted probably 40 different alternatives. I have a slide here that shows kind of an overview of the alternatives that we looked at. We looked at groundwater recharge in both the Santa Margarita to the north and the Prisma or Mid-County Basin to the east. We looked at direct potable reuse. We looked at surface water augmentation in Loch Lomond and stream flow augmentation in the San Lorenzo River. We did a market assessment to see in our service area what kind of demand there is for non-potable reuse. Like Toby, I was voted soft speaker, so I think that's why he's sorry. We did a market assessment to see what kind of demand there is for non-potable reuse in our service area. And like Toby mentioned, Paso Tiempo is one of the biggest users there from the north part of the service area there. The issue we have here, while it's a really elegant solution for reusing your wastewater, is they're spread out all over our service area. So the cost of this water for the end user is tremendously expensive. The study concluded with these 5 different alternatives. The first 2 are non-potable irrigation projects. The first being continuing to work with our wastewater plant on Title 22 water for irrigation purposes. They already use non-Title 22 but recycled water on their site right now. And this would open up the opportunity to use it on the landscape area around the site there and do some bulk water stations as well. And then the second project, non-potable project, we coined the phrase the Bay Cycle project, and it would try to pick up some of the demands along the Bay Street corridor for non-potable reuse, potentially ending at UCSC to meet their non-potable irrigation demands. The other 3 projects are for indirect potable reuse, which is coordination with the Pure Water SoCal project, for and then groundwater replenishment, again in the Mid-County Basin as well as the Santa Margarita Basin. So we concluded that study, and then at the same time we were doing the update to the seawater desalination in the Spruce project. And the purpose of this effort was to look at change conditions between the conclusion in 2013 of that project and 2017 when we hired UDEC to do this work. Change conditions in terms of demand, any regulatory changes. And again, we did that study between 2017 and 2018. What we found with that project was the gap could be filled. In other words, we could feasibly produce 1.2 billion gallons per year from seawater. We refined the cost significantly based on the change conditions, and the biggest change condition is reflected in those last 2 bullets being the cost and the timeliness. There was some rather significant regulatory changes made. that made the permitting a little bit uncertain, or a lot of uncertainty around seawater desalination in terms of the type of intake that we would be allowed to pursue. And so this is in the packet as well. This is the council action on element 3. So at the end of last year, they took these 3 actions. The first was, again, to continue to pursue tertiary at our wastewater treatment plant, which we're doing. We're working with Public Works and SoCal to pursue that effort. We also want to make sure that we don't lose sight of this, both the non-potable and the indirect potable alternatives that are outstanding. Because per the WSAC work plan, at this point, we are intending to select recycled water for desalination and then continue to advance the selected one, which is recycled water, to the point in 2020 when we start making decisions about all of the water supply portfolios. So hence the third bullet where the council directed staff to cease work on desal for the foreseeable future unless and until either of the alternatives demonstrate themselves to be able to.
Okay, so one of the items that we wanted to include in this discussion was something that I think I included some information on the backbone infrastructure, reinvestment, replacement work that we've had going on. And I wanted to specifically talk about water treatment because, go ahead, Heidi, to the next one. This is a project that we believe we really need to do because of the condition of the water treatment plant. It is a 60-year-old facility. It's in major need of rehabilitation replacement. There's an opportunity when we do this to go ahead and improve the treatment process, which would give us both wet season, sort of 2017, 2019 winter kinds of benefits of being able to treat more turbid water and be able to have a more reliable supply in those kinds of conditions, as well as dry season benefits, because a more robust treatment process would allow us to, for example, remove the first flush constraint or take more turbid water even in those very intense rainstorms that might occur during a dry condition. So one of the big issues here for us is that this project is, probably in the neighborhood of $75 million. So it's a very expensive project, and when you're prioritizing this as something that needs to get done, along with some of the other major capital programs we're dealing with, including the Mill Creek Dam Inlet Outlet Project and the concrete tanks replacement at the water treatment plant, it's very much a kind of, okay, what are we going to prioritize? So this is a project, once you move ahead to the next slide, that we've been talking about some design criteria. These are wares that we're going to look at in terms of peak day capacity, annual averages, ability to treat much more turbid water, and to improve the quality of our product through better ability to deal with the total organic content in many of our sources, including the San Lorenzo River and Mill Creek, Loch Lomond water in particular. So these give us some ability to really improve the product quality as well as the robustness against the, as I said, wet season and dry season kind of conditions. So one more. We asked Gary to give us some information based on, and turned into this sort of treatment or sizing of facilities for injection and extraction and using aquifer storage and recovery. This is a way for us to say if we had an improved treatment plant, you'll see that under some of the climate conditions, the GFDL climate, for example, the size of the injection, you have to have fewer wells or lower total quantity of wells in order to go from 6 injection capacity to 4, because you can access the water that needs to go through the treatment plant and have more water to actually stand on a daily basis. And you can see some other changes there that would allow us to take advantage of that kind of situation. These are mostly dry year benefits. The wet year benefits occur in having us not be shut down so many days on the river, therefore taking water out of storage and building our capacity to produce a more reliable supply in those kinds of wet year conditions. You're going to hear more about this when Gary talks about this later, but I wanted to introduce this to you as some of the benefits on the dry year water supply, benefits for the sizing of infrastructure that we can use to deliver water into storage even under somewhat more challenging conditions. Okay.
Rosemary, before you move on, just a quick one on these climate change models. You introduced CMIP 5 here. Does that somehow relate to Sean's form?
That's the 4 model and Sunbelt.
They're
Sorry,
the same
yeah,
thing.
those are the same thing, sorry. And you know, Doug, I think this goes next to into the major conversation, so maybe we want to take a pause here and see what kind of questions there might be up to this point.
Do we have anybody on the panel?
In terms of the demand not rebounding after the drought period and stuff, what do we have that's, I mean, the same thing happened in 76, 77, 78. Didn't come back as quickly as people thought it would, but eventually it didn't come back ever to the level they thought it would, but it came back. It wasn't like there wasn't some increase. So what do we know from other districts or from our own experience about, you said it was about a fourth of the effect was from not building not so many units,
Right.
demanding stuff. We've had a bunch of housing projects that have been stalled for a variety of reasons. Corridor plans having issues, and who knows where they're going. Downtown projects not built as quickly as people had projected they would be. So I would imagine that pent-up demand at some point returns. I mean, housing's a huge demand, and the city's not going to sleep on that question. Whatever they end up doing, they're going to produce more affordable housing and more of it. So what do we know about, even though we know that demand is less than we thought, and we've looked at that, and that's a very positive thing for our situation for water demand. I don't think we can just stop there and say, that's it. I mean, do we have any projections based on what we think might happen, either in the area of more customers or people starting to decide that they want to start doing more things in their gardens or whatever it is that would bring that back up?
Well, I think that we don't think that the number is going to stick at 2.6 for forever, but the fact that we had 2 years of depressed demand under a restriction that were in that neighborhood of total demand, and then we had 3 years following, and the 3 years following were 16 was a normal year in terms of our water year classification. 17 was the wettest year on record. 18 was a dry year. This year has gone over into the wet cycle just last week. So, and we're not seeing this rebound. So what we're thinking is that it's going to be it's going to rebound slowly and probably over time based on development and things that might happen. But it's not going to bounce back. And we could plan to improve conditions locally and recognize that they're going to have some benefits, some durability of benefits over time, because it's going to take a while for it to come back, if it ever comes back all the way to 3.2, right?
Right. My second question is to you, when you're projecting how much capacity we could increase at, say, the water treatment plant or in other aspects of the system, is that a decision that's made once and then you're stuck with it for the next 50 years? Or are there modular possibilities of expanding in a certain way and then leaving open options in case other things change? I don't know the answer to that
It
question.
depends, I guess I would say. Certain kinds of things like hydraulic capacity is probably a more stuck thing than something like a treatment process train where you can leave space in what we do now to insert a new treatment process. We've sort of done that in the concrete tanks project to leave a spot where we could put a UV disinfection unit in the process train there. So it's kind of thinking ahead. But one of the things that's really important, and one of the reasons I included that long document that was the water quality vulnerability analysis in the packet, is a water treatment plant is much less sort of adaptable to really big changes in the way you want to think about it in the future than many other aspects of your facilities, because it's such an integral, certain treatment capacity or treatment process trains and those kinds of things. So it's really important when you're talking about kind of making the investment that we're making to really think ahead about where are the likely regulations coming from? What are the concerns that are likely going to be affecting us in the future that we need to think about now so that we either make room or we think about a treatment process that has the ability to deal with a lot of those kinds of changes. It's sort of what we called in the WSAC process adaptive flexibility, right?
Thank you.
Let's scribble one down real quick. I'll, go ahead.
Simple. The study.
Really loud, Ron.
I'm sorry?
Really loud.
Yeah.
Oh, loud. The 1.2 billion gap per year, that's what WSAC worked under. What was the assumption? What's the gap now? What's the
You're
assumed
going to
gap?
see
We'll get
that.
there.
Oh, okay.
You're going to see that.
That's what the measurement for the desal study. So that's what you were working under.
No, that, the
Is
1.2
that what you
billion
said?
gallons was not the measurement for the desal study. It was from the WSAC process.
Okay, what was the assumption for the desal?
I don't know.
Because it said it was going to fill the gap of
It could-
1.2
it-
billion.
it- Yeah, by design, it could have filled the 1.2 billion gallon meter gap, but it's kind of moved.
Okay, so you'll talk about that.
We'll talk about the gap. I have a question. You had alluded to the vulnerability report that was included in the packet, and a member of the public who couldn't be here tonight pointed out to me that, reminded me that that report referenced the 2016 CEC testing results that the department did. And at that time, the department said we were going to continue to do some form of CEC testing on an ongoing basis, but she hadn't seen any of that information. So curious about what the status of that testing and reporting is.
And you said it's CEC.
Sorry, CEC's.
Constituents of emerging concern.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so chemicals in the water that aren't yet regulated.
Right. So we have done some additional testing after that first year, and neither, unfortunately, by the time this question came up today, neither Heidi nor I could get a hold of the water quality manager to ask him where the data is. I think it might have gotten integrated into those two source water quality reports, but I couldn't swear to it, so we'll follow up on that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions right now? Okay, so we've kind of gone through some of the background. Oh, Cruz?
I don't know if this is the right place, but I'm getting the terminology of the gap. And perhaps you'll get to it when we do more discussion of the gap. But the biggest question I have is what assumptions about climate change are in the gap?
The 1.2 billion gallons had GFDL 2.1 demands in it. That's how much water was available. So that was the climate change.
What year?
What year?
EFDL.
The
Because it
2.1.
increases, the temperatures increase and,
The one that's there's a paper in the packet of stuff, and if you want to, I mean, we can give it to you or send it to you, but that had the information about the various climate change options, including a comparison of the various ones, looking at how they developed over time. And so it was a whole series of, a whole set of hydrology. 50 years, I think, is probably what it was. Right?
Yep.
Gary? Yeah, 50 years. Created hydrology for that sort of downscale hydrology form, that climate change scenario. Okay?
On the go.
All right. So I think this is you, Heidi, right?
I can do this.
Yeah. Let's get to the
I have it right here.
Okay, great.
I can summarize the first slide, and then I think I might hand it off to Gary. Just a quick background that the very important part of the groundwater solutions was the inland water transfers and exchanges. As you know, we have been doing this actively with Soco Creek, with the water transfer at the moment. We are working on our nomenclature to be clear about what inland means. And Cedar is going to help us understand those two terms in a minute. The initial work performed by Kennedy Jenks for the county in 2013 only contemplated the idea of moving water to other agencies. It didn't really think about or model how that would serve water back to the city. And so a lot of the work, all of the work that we're looking at now, we split that term into two parts because we see that under certain conditions we do have excess water. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's water to be returned to the city. So that's an important distinction to make. We're helping out other agencies, but it might not help us out in the long run. We had the agreement in 2016 to transfer water to Southampton Water District. Like I said, we're doing that right now. This is the kickoff of that event that many of you were able to go to. And then this is their the isolated zone that is receiving that transferred water in the district. We're planning to do this transfer through the end of April. And then we're working with the district to understand the opportunities for doing it again next year, and then potentially expanding the zone in which we will do this.
What was the last line you said there? I couldn't hear.
That we're working with the Southampton Water District now to see about the opportunities to do the same pilot next year, and or expanding this zone. The zone in white is the zone that's receiving the city water at the moment. And to see if there's opportunity for us to expand that zone. I think currently we're sending them 300, you don't have there?
0.4 MPD, is that right? I see Taj nodding his head. That's the demand work that's being offset by surface water in that.
What was the number?
0.4 MGD.
Question on that. What's the capacity of that?
1.4 million gallons a day.
So 0.4 is, the limitation is based on the North Coast constraint?
No, the limitation is based on the amount of demand that's being offset.
Oh, I see.
I think I'm going to hand this over to Isidro, because Isidro is the one working on both the ASR and also the pilot project.
So the other water storage project that the city is looking at is the ASR aquifer storage and recovery.
You have to hold that in my brain.
So again, the other water storage project the city is looking at is the ASR aquifer storage and recovery. And so we wanted to evaluate the feasibility of storing water in regional aquifers or for future use during a drought. And to do this, the city contracted with Pueblo Water Resources in 2016 to initially complete phase 1, which is the initial feasibility study, and then subsequently we contracted with Pueblo in October of 2018 to complete pilot testing of ASR at Bells 12, which is phase 2. Phase 3 of our ASR work plan hasn't started yet, so right now we're in phase 2. So just really quick, like I said, we're in phase 2 right now, but prior to starting phase 2, we did substantial work during phase 1, which we completed higher level feasibility work. We looked at different wells that we could use for pilot testing, and ultimately we actually developed a pilot test work plan for one of the existing wells, which is known as Bells 12. And then we started with some initial iterations for groundwater modeling. So as I mentioned, right now we're in phase 2, and we are actively pilot testing at Bells 12. Right now we're in cycle 3 injection. We're hoping to finish that actually this week. And we'll do a couple more months of just storage, and then we'll follow that up with recovery. And we're hoping to actually wrap up the full test program sometime in early July. And then actually I'll pass it back over to Gary. We'll talk about some of the groundwater modeling or the complex modeling that was done for ASR and Newell.
Hello, it's good to be back.
much of what I'm going to be showing you, at least in the first part of our presentation, will be very familiar to some of you. A lot of the slides come from a presentation I made to the Water Commission back in 2017. It's important to spend a few minutes talking about the water supply model that we've been using, called Confluence, how it's used and why, because it is so integral to what we do in terms of planning, thinking about ASR and igloo storage. So, here we go. So, the Confluence model. What is it and what is it not? It's a planning model. It's not an operations model. It's a tool to simulate the operation of the system. It's not a tool to optimize the operation of the system. In other words, Confluence can help us if we ask it questions. What if this, that, and the other thing, with these kinds of flows, with this kind of infrastructure, with these kinds of constraints, how well can the system operate and serve demands? But it doesn't tell us what is the best way to do something. Confluence can compare scenarios, but again, it can't identify what the best scenario might be. Okay, I don't expect you to, well, first of all,
Copies around the table of this chart. And I don't know if anybody else, are there copies in the back? People have copies? There's some more on the table in the back if you need one.
This is a table of how the assumptions that underlie the Confluence model have changed over time. And I think that's one of the major points of showing this, that the assumptions have changed and will continue to change as we get better information, as we try to answer different questions. What I want to just focus on in my remarks is the right-hand column. What are some of the key assumptions that have changed post-WSAC? One of them is, Rosemary and Toby have already talked about, the demands. In addition to looking at the 3.2 billion gallon annual demand that we were looking at in WSAC, we're also looking at the implications of the near-term demand that we're seeing of about 2.6 billion gallons a year. So that's one post-WSAC change. The other one has also been talked about. During the WSAC process, we looked at a single climate change projection, the GFDL 2.1 scenario. Since then, a lot of work has been done and continues to be done looking at other possible climate change paths. And to date, we've analyzed the two others, the four-model ensemble, the CMIP5 that Rosemary talked about, as well as the catalog. So that's another major change that's happened. The other major change is that we're also looking at the implications of the changes, the improvements to the treatment plant that Rosemary alluded to. Okay. So when one opens Confluence and loads a database with City Santa Cruz, this is what you see. So this is a schematic of the system. There are different versions of this. This particular schematic reflects ASR and igloo storage, but don't worry about the details of this. The point is, this is an interactive data map. You double click on any of those icons on the map, a window opens up, a dialog box opens up. You can look at all the assumptions that underlie that supply or that treatment plant or that demand node. So this is what we look at. The model operates with a daily time step. In other words, it goes through day by day by day by day. And each day it says, okay, this is the demand today that we're seeking to serve, the Santa Cruz demand. Now we have to dispatch the system to serve that demand. How do we do that? Well, we do that as is always the case with the model. We try to basically mimic what happens in the real world. And what happens in the real world is that the North Coast is dispatched first, the North Coast diversions, then the diversion at Tate Street, then the Tate Street wells, the Bells wells, and finally, all of those are dispatched to serve demand. And then, if there's water left over, we dispatch that water into storage, if there's room in storage. And by storage, we were talking about surface water storage in Loch Lomond, as well as groundwater storage, if we're looking at groundwater storage possibilities. There is and I'll talk in a little while, there is a number 6. After all of this, if there's still water left over, then that water could be available for transfers to neighboring agencies such as Soquel Creek. And I'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes.
Can I ask a quick question? On the table, North Coast annual demand, is that supposed to be million gallons?
Which table?
Right there.
Yes.
Yes, North Coast annual
It
demands.
says BG, but I think it's supposed to be NG.
It is NG. You're right, thank you.
Good catch.
Yes, very good catch.
Otherwise, you don't have a problem.
No, if it was BG, we'd have a big problem.
Yeah,
That's the big North
That's probably the reason, all right.
Okay, so that's the dispatch order, but it's not that simple, of course, and in the real world it's not that simple, because there are lots of other constraints that limit how well you can dispatch the sources. Each source has a capacity. You can only divert so much water per day at Tate Street, for instance. Also, the available flows. The city has been engaged for a long time in discussions with state and federal agencies to develop flow rules that leave water in the streams for the fish. Well, the amount that the city can divert is constrained by those flow rules. There are water rights, there are turbidity constraints. If the water is too turbid, then at a particular diversion point, it can't be diverted that day because the treatment plant can't treat it. If the treatment plant is improved, then one of the implications of that will be that water that is more turbid could be treated, and there'll be more water available to divert for that reason. There are first flush requirements, there are production limits, all kinds of constraints, all of which are true in the real world and are built into the modeling as well. So, when we modeled in-lieu storage and ASR, we modeled them against historical flows, and we modeled them against each of the 3 climate change scenarios that we are now considering. The key assumptions that we've made is that we could store up to 3 billion gallons in the aquifers. That's the storage capacity, and that there are 20% losses. So for every 100 gallons that we put in to the aquifers, we can only ultimately recover 80 gallons. These assumptions you have to keep in mind. These assumptions were and are our best estimates, but they are subject to the results of the groundwater model that's being done. So it may very well turn out that these assumptions need to be modified in the future as we get some feedback from the groundwater modeling that is going on. But for now, these are our best guesses of, and this is what we're using for modeling purposes when we think about ASR and in-lieu storage. Our goal, and the WSAC's goal, was to determine how much infrastructure for injection and extraction is needed to basically eliminate the peak season shortage in the worst drought. The modeling of in lieu and ASR is integrated with the HCP process, like we said. All the flow rules, as we've gone along, this is a slide from the 2017 presentation. Since then, the city has reached an agreement with the agencies, and so those flow rules that are reflected in that agreement are now also reflected in our modeling. Slightly different than what we were using during the WSAC. We looked at how to jointly operate the city surface storage, groundwater storage. We considered two different fill periods before the drought, because you have to think, okay, if we're going to have a bad drought, how many years before that are we going to have to fill the aquifer that we could then draw down during the drought? So we looked at that point at 3-year and 7-year fill periods. And we looked at and continue to look at the impacts of climate change versus historical flows.
Gary, I have a question.
Yes?
Did you say that we now have agreement with the fish regulatory agencies about how much we can take out of the various streams?
I'm going to leave that
Yes,
to Rosemary.
we do.
Great. I had no idea. Thank you.
We're actually moving ahead right now with the water rights changes to integrate those flows into the water rights.
Thank you.
Does that change our baseline assumption for water supply compared to what we did in WSAC?
Slightly. There are some changes having to do with bypass flows between Felton and Tate. And there were some changes having to do with in-migration, out-migration flows in December and April. Did I get anything, did I miss anything, Chris?
That's pretty much it. Sorry. No, I'm good. Okay. So this table and the next two are old ones. They were taken from the 2017 presentation. They reflect the situation at the end of the WSAC process. And basically the question that we were asking, and that we continue to ask, is how much infrastructure, how much ASR infrastructure, how much injection and or extraction infrastructure would we need to minimize and hopefully eliminate the shortage, to plug the gap basically. The gap being the peak season shortage in the worst drought. That's the way the WSAC defined the problem, and that's the way we continue to define the problem, saying in the worst drought, the gap is so many hundreds of millions of gallons of shortage. What would it take to plug that gap? Or if we can't plug it, what would it take to minimize it? This one is just looking at in lieu storage. In lieu storage meaning that we basically ship water to neighboring agencies to offset their demands, which would have normally been met through groundwater withdrawals. So in lieu is limited by those demands. And since in lieu is limited by those demands, by the assumptions we made about what those demands would be, in lieu by itself is not sufficient to totally plug the gap. So for instance, with the historic flows, with a 3-year fill period, we're still left with a shortage of 500 million gallons. We can't do better than that because of the limitation of the demands that we're offsetting. So that's in lieu by itself. This is the situation with ASR by itself. So do you want to take questions? Or take questions now, or I'm not sure how you want to manage that.
So the is that take into account the current size of the pipe or an expanded size of the pipe? Like, for example, between us and SoCal, the current size of the pipe
Doesn't have anything to do with the pipe.
but I mean, as far as the amount of water that can be transported.
It doesn't have anything to do with the capacity of that infrastructure, it's what their demand is. So their demand is 2.3 million gallons, and even though the pipe is only 1.4, it doesn't care about that infrastructure at this stage.
So
We
you're
assume
saying
we
it's
offset that
infrastructure
2.3.
independent.
Yeah.
Right.
We would eliminate that as a constraint in the context of this evaluation.
So earlier you showed us a map that in SoCal Creek Water District where certain wells have been shut down, I assume, to serve those customers, but it wasn't the whole SoCal Creek
No.
Water District. So is that an artificial limit on the demand as opposed to there was What is it that stops
The
us
pilot
doubling
was-
that area?
The pilot was designed specifically to be a partial area.
Sure.
To sort of scale up to see if there were any water quality issues. We did a lot of work on the water quality compatibility between surface water and groundwater. We had reason to think that we wouldn't have problems. But in an abundance of caution of not wanting to just sort of open the valve and everything, there was a specific area that was chosen to have the first year of the pilot.
I'm not criticizing the
No.
pilot design, I'm just asking, the next phase, if you think about expanding this, there's obviously a lot more in lieu capacity than what we're currently serving, because that has been defined by a limited pilot project.
Yes.
That's all great.
What does the term drawdown mean?
Drawdown means extraction.
It's the capacity that you have to have over like a 6-month period in order to fill the gap, to maximize what you can take out against the constraints of, what, 80% recovery. So it's like, if you have a gap, you want to take water every day to offset that gap. That's what that drawdown
So
capacity is.
well capacity.
Well capacity,
Yeah.
right. So for example, this is ASR only. With historic flows and assuming a 3-year pre-drought fill period, we would need 5.5 MGD of injection capacity over that 3-year period prior to the drought to get enough water in to the basin that we then start to draw down during the drought. And the drawdown capacity, the extraction capacity that we would need for that drought would be 4.5 million gallons per day. And that infrastructure would allow us to basically plug the entire gap. There would be zero shortage remaining.
1.2 billion gallons.
Can I see the last slide for just a second? Okay. So in lieu, you still need to have some new wells or something, because it looks like a large amount of pumping would need to happen for extraction.
Yeah, you don't have any injection because you're doing offsets, right? But you have extraction to be able to get it back.
But we don't have that ability right now. 4.5 million gallons a day is not.
No.
No, but the question we asked is how much would we need in order to plug the gap? So, and this last slide is for combined in lieu and ASR. If we were doing both at the same time, and so we were offsetting those demands, and then using ASR to plug the rest of the gap that we couldn't fill through ASR, this is the ASR infrastructure that we would need. This is the injection and extraction infrastructure that we would need in addition to the in lieu. So these tables were all tables that were reflected the analysis that we did for the WSAC.
And that's the GFDL 2.1 climate change scenario.
Right. So what I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes is where are we now? What's changed? What are the current results that we're looking at? So again, major changes. We're looking at 3 climate change projections instead of just the GFDL. We're looking at the near-term demand forecast of 2.6 billion gallons in addition to the 3.2 billion gallon per year forecast that we looked at for the WSAC. Okay, and this is a comparison of those monthly demand profiles. Okay, so the blue line was the 3.2 billion gallons per year. Those months add up to 3.2 billion gallons. The red is the near term based on the 2016 to 2018 demands that add up to 2.6 billion gallons. In addition to the annual demand being a lot lower, it's also a little bit flatter. That the percentage of the demand in the summer, in the peak season, is slightly less now in 2016 to 18 than it was in our 3.2 billion gallon demand forecast. So, okay. So there's some questions before about the gap. So these are the latest, our current estimates of the gap based on the 4 flow projections, historical and 3 climate change projections that we're looking at. So, and with the two different demand forecasts. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through this cell by cell, but these are the kind of numbers that we're looking at. Obviously, not surprisingly, the numbers are a lot smaller when we're looking at the near term 2.6 billion gallon per year forecast than the 3.2 that we're looking at for the WSAC. So the gap, the way the WSAC defined the gap was for the worst drought, and that's what this previous slide showed. But in addition to the worst drought, there are other years that are not quite that bad, but that would still show some shortages. So these two graphs basically show the distribution of shortages, the shortage you'd experience over the entire distribution, the entire flow records for each of those 4 cases. The one on the left is with the 3.2 billion gallon demand. The one on the right is with the 2.6 billion gallon demand. Obviously, and I scaled them the same, so you can see pretty clearly that the 2.6 billion gallon demand in the near term really reduces the size of the near term problem that the city would be facing. Okay. So this is the current version based on current assumptions of the capacities that we would need, the injection and extraction capacities that we would need with an ASR program to eliminate those gaps that we just saw. And again, the needs in the near term with the 2016 to 2018 demands are a lot less. You can plug the gap because the gap's a lot smaller with a lot less investment in injection and extraction wells. I will say that with the catalog climate change, with the 3.2 billion gallon demand, it was impossible. We could not totally plug that gap with ASR because of the characteristics of that climate change projection and the concentration of the precipitation events into small periods makes it very difficult to have enough injection capacity to pull the water out during those periods when we have the really high flows in the streams. So that's why you see those NAs there.
Real quick, are you able to characterize what the unmet gap was in those NA cases, just so we have an idea of the magnitude of the remaining gap in that particular scenario?
5. That's really has to be 3 billion because of the 20% losses. Is that correct?
No, this is the total.
Okay.
This is the total,
All right.
including the losses. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about. I'm sorry, is there another question?
Quick question. Gary, you talked about 20% losses anticipated in ASR, just in general, as background. And I've seen 15 to 20% losses in ASR, even in landlocked systems. But in the case of a basin that's pushing out against seawater to prevent saltwater intrusion, why don't you have greater losses? I would expect greater losses. So how does the 20% number work?
Well, like I said before, the 20% number was an assumption that we made based on discussions with groundwater experts prior to any real modeling of those basins. So we still don't know if 20% is the right number. And we'll know more once that modeling is completed. We'll get some feedback, and if it turns out that 20% is really wrong, then basically we have to feedback into the confluence modeling and say, okay, well, instead of 20%, it's 40% or whatever, and see what the implications of that are.
Thank you.
When you say we'll find out once that modeling is completed, are you referring to once the model is informed by the pilot testing?
What am I referring to?
So, we'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about groundwater modeling.
mean, because you're recalibrating the model as you get information from the pilot test, correct? So that's the data that helps you to update the model.
Well, it's happening both on the pilot test for the ASR side as well as as you saw in your packet, there's a whole discussion of improvements from in lieu to the basin that don't benefit us because they're in a strata we don't take water from, right?
Right, and different models have different parameters
Yeah.
that they're measuring.
Yeah, ultimately, the groundwater model will have an output of as to what a water level would look like, say, in the coast. And after the pilot testing, or after we evaluate some of that data, we'll be able to see how close we were to some of our predicted water levels. And so that'll give us an idea of how close we were in terms of assuming a certain loss, expecting a certain water level at a certain location.
And that's what we expect to have in the next few months.
Actually, we do have a number for ASR in terms of the current model output that we have. And it's a little bit higher than 20%, it's around 25%.
I had the same question.
Okay. So the last thing that I want to talk about before I turn it back to Sidro is the question of what is our ability to transfer water.
Can I interrupt one? Because it's a continuation of this discussion on the losses from the public. Read the 20% loss from aquifers. One, is that per year? Or
No.
Per 3-year cycle, or just daily?
No, for every 100 gallons you put in,
Period.
at some point, ultimately, you'll be able to recover 80 gallons of that.
It's sort of a cumulative 20%.
Cumulative.
So it changes over time.
And does it, and I'm not sure this is answerable right now, does it pertain to Scotts Valley Water District and Soquel Creek Water District? So you're talking about two different aquifers? So are we using the same 20% in Santa Margarita as in Basin?
Right now, the confidence modeling we are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the question, so I mentioned before that in the sorry, okay, into the microphone. I mentioned before that we talked about the dispatch order, and I mentioned that the last thing in the dispatch order is sharing water with neighboring agencies. That is, after the city has left sufficient water in the streams of the fish per the HCP flow rules, after it has met its own demands as best it can, this is on every day, on any day of the simulation, after it has put water in storage, both in Loch Lomond and in the aquifers, after all that is done to meet its own needs, then if there is still water left over, that water is potentially available to transfer to neighboring agencies. Okay, so with that prioritization, this table gives you an idea for Soquel Creek Water District of how often, what portion of the time, how many of the years in the record can you meet the 3 transfer volume targets for Soquel Creek. And I think the one I want to focus on is the annual 1,500 acre foot, because that's a measure of what Soquel Creek's needs are. And what you see here, with all of the flow sets, the historical and the 3 climate change projections, and with both of the demand levels, the 3.2 billion gallons and the 2.6 billion gallon annual demands, in no case can the city consistently provide that amount of water to Soquel Creek. It's not there once all of the other priorities to meet the city's own needs are met. Improving the treatment plant, the treatment plant improvements that Rosemary talked about, which are on the right, that does help some. It allows you to meet, to achieve that target, that 1,500 acre foot target for Soquel Creek more often, but still, it's a lot less than every year. There are many, many years, many flow years where we can't meet that 1,500 acre foot target. So that's sort of the takeaway. Without going into all the individual numbers, that's kind of the main takeaway from this table. And with, there are other people, I'm about to sit down, so people want to ask me questions now? Please.
From an operational standpoint, you can't just call them up like one day and be like, okay, we have enough water today, are you ready for it? Do you know what the lead time is in order to make that transfer happen? Or?
Well, I
way.
think that one of the things we've experienced in the transfer that we've been doing is there are a number of operational issues that make us or make them take less water or provide less water. And so there's been a lot of conversations going on back and forth between the city and SoCal since December when we started this transfer, and it has all kinds of operational needs, like they need to refresh their well, or we are, you know, we're having an operational issue that we need to shut down or back off or whatever. We had a really dry period where we had high fish flows from the North Coast sources, and we were concerned that if that kept up for a long time, we wouldn't be able to meet our numbers at balancing at the end of the month. So it's kind of a, I think that the operators would say it's been a more complicated thing than they imagined. Right? The operation folks from SoCal would answer that question in the same way?
It just seems like this is looking with hindsight into what has happened in the past, which is different than how you would be operating if you were looking forward. You'd probably want to have a little bit more, you know, a conservative approach.
Well, I think this is really only looking at the volumes that are available. It doesn't have anything to do with the operations or what have you. And the assumption is that if you're going to do 1,500 acre feet, that you have to have an amount of water that's going every single day.
Right.
And that has to work every single day to get to that line.
Yeah, Rick.
So the top row there, historical, that's just the, you know, the in the record of the last 70 years or something. Is that how that goes?
Yeah, the historical record is 79 years that we're looking at from 1937 to 2015 is our historical record. Each of the three climate change records are 51 years long. So we have a 51-year record for each of those three.
Can you explain that first climate change scenario, GFDL, that actually performs better than the historical record in when you get over to the improved Grand Hill water treatment plant?
Yes, a little better with the 2.6 billion gallon demands. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea what that's about?
Not offhand. I mean, it's because it's since the model is dispatched daily based on the daily pattern of flows in each of the records. There's no simple answer, and I don't have the answer in my head of exactly why that is. I have to sort of dig down to look for it. But what we've learned in all of this work is that it's very difficult to sort of summarize each of these distributions in 25 words or less. Yeah. It's easy to say this is drier and warmer, this is cooler and wetter, but there's a lot more to it than that in terms of what the pattern is of the flows and how much they deviate, that kind of thing.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Are we assuming we're already in one of the climate change scenarios, or are we thinking that's going to happen in 20 years? Or
I don't know.
We're not assuming that we're in one of them, although when you experience actual weather, it seems like we might be in one of them.
Yeah.
Whiplash weather is what we call it these days, you know, it's sort of like dry and then it's like wet. And this is my 6th winter. There's been one normal in that year. I don't know how to do with me, but 2 really wet ones, two dry ones, a normal, and a critically dry.
okay, so we're assuming like it's good. Like if we're trying to think of a window of time, 20 years, we're thinking this is as good as any guess that we have.
Well, I think we need to do a lot more in thinking about the potential implications of climate change, of various kinds on the surface water reliability. I think that's one of the things that's kind of in the future additional work we would like to do, and one of the reasons why we think it makes some sense to take some more time to do that.
Okay.
Gary, a couple more
Yes.
from the public. To what extent has the capacity of the water treatment plant a rate limiting factor, or to accommodate either inland transfers or productivity for ASR?
My experience in the modeling has been that the capacity of the plant that we're assuming now has typically not been a major constraint, other than when we're talking about also trying to transfer water to neighboring agencies. There, we bump up more against the existing assumed capacity of the plant, which is 16.5 MGD, rather than the 18 MGD that we would experience with the improvements.
And is the 18 adequate?
I don't think increasing it much beyond 18 would really get us much more water. You have to realize that the plant improvements not only increase the capacity of the plant, it also allows us to treat more turbid water, which is probably a bigger impact than the actual capacity.
Thank you.
And Gary, another question from the public. Well, first, I was handed some backup data, so there's a statement that I'm going to add a question. And the statement is that the 20% as an overall characterization is probably wrong, that the loss is variable. And it starts at 0 and can reach 100% depending on flow and leakage to streams, for example. And then there's some backup information suggesting that it supports that both for Scotts Valley and also the Mid-County model. So the question I'm going to turn that into is, are you able to model variable rates of loss if the information coming in suggests that that loss is variable somehow tied to, I suppose, the amount of storage of the levels in the respective basins? Or is it just a number?
It's just a number. You got to realize Confluence is not a groundwater model.
Right.
So basically, Confluence doesn't know much about hydrogeology or any of that stuff. So could we vary the loss rate? Perhaps. It depends how we want to vary it, and I wouldn't want to commit to that, but something I can think about if and when it became relevant.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I want to turn it back to Isidro. I guess I should say a few words about this slide. I think it's pretty self-evident that basically Confluence interacts with a lot of other models, both in two directions. It provides inputs to other models, and it uses information from other models, in particular the groundwater models, apropos of this question. So I want to turn it back to Isidro to talk some more about the groundwater modeling that's been done.
Thanks, Gary. As Gary mentioned, after he's done with his work, ultimately has outputs of his model that now become inputs to the groundwater model. And I'll just walk you through some of the modeling work that we've done, or groundwater modeling work that we've done to help us assess whether or not these projects would be viable for the city. So just very briefly, we are using two separate independent models. One that's built specifically for the Santa Margarita groundwater basin, and one that's specific to the Mid-County groundwater basin. And as with the Confluence model, these are calibrated against the historical periods. In this case, they're 1985 through 2015. So a lot of the modeling work has actually been presented over the past 6 months at various meetings, particularly the Water Commission in October, and then the Groundwater Sustainability Plan Advisory Committee at a couple of their meetings. And for the most part, we have just been presenting ASR modeling results, but recently we've been looking at not just the city's ASR project, but combining that with SoCal Creek's Pure Water SoCal project. So as with the confidence model, there are some assumptions that we are using for the groundwater modeling work. So the purpose for us running some of these scenarios, or some of the scenarios through the groundwater model, is really to validate some of the assumptions that came out of WSAC. Particularly whether or not we have enough storage capacity in the basins. Again, with Gary, we are looking at 3 billion gallons of combined storage, and we are using. We also are trying to assess whether or not the storage losses in terms of seeing 20%, is that realistic once you operate your ASR project, whether or not 20% is realistic. We're also looking at specific per well injection rates. I think during WSAC we had some estimates ranging between 0.3 and 0.5 MGD on average. And so we're trying to see if that model can sustain those rates.
Next question for you.
Sure.
So the capacity of the basins, the determination here is that it's a certain amount. It's not, if I understood the summary Rosemary gave us, would be enough to meet the city's needs under various kinds of conditions, but not enough there to meet both SoCal Creek and the city's needs. Is that?
Actually, that's the capacity of water available for either putting into storage or meeting the seawater intrusion barrier that SoCal is working on. It doesn't have to do so much with the capacity of the basins to store water.
Yeah.
So
the initial assessment is we know we need roughly 3 billion gallons. So our starting point is, can the basin sustain that volume?
That's for the city's needs,
yes.
But that's not enough to cover the two.
No. And right now we're just looking at whether or not the basins can meet the city's
No, I understand that. And so we don't know the answer to the question of what ultimately this basin is capable of holding before it flows out to sea or is not recoverable for one reason or
We've
another.
seen some results in some recent groundwater modeling. We're not actually showing them today, where you operate ASR project and you operate the Pure Water SoCal project, and this was shown at the GSP Advisory Committee meeting last week, and water levels go so high is that water's running out from the ground into the surface area. So that's an indication that there's a limit, or you need to move the injections or the storage around in a place that would minimize those kind of interactions.
So our problem would be people's basements flooding?
Well,
I'm ready for this.
some variety of things like that, but not desirable, right?
Thank you.
So again, as part of phase 1, we ran various scenarios through the groundwater models. Some of the basic ones are just INLU only, ASR only, and then the combination of INLU and ASR. And as I just mentioned recently, we are looking at the combination of ASR and Pure Water SoCal. And the figure that you see here is sort of our first snapshot of what an ASR project would look like. There's 3 ASR wells in the city service area, and there's also 3 ASR wells in SoCal Creek's water service area. I guess the legend here actually shows you where those wells would be screened in terms of formations within the groundwater basin.
That's good to see. And again, this is from a member of the public, and if I understand the question correctly, can you back up one slide? Thank you. So it lists a per well injection rate, for example, with a certain MGD, and even in the discussion that Gary presented, there were numbers presented on a daily basis, and they were kind of uniform rate numbers, either in terms of what goes in or what comes out. And the question that one of the members of the public has is, does that assumption of a uniform rate, as opposed to assuming maybe higher sometimes and lower other times, does that create an artificial constraint? Somehow could you recognize more value if that rate were varied, as opposed to assuming a uniform daily rate, either on putting in it or taking it out?
From the point of view of the confluence modeling, it's not that it's a uniform daily rate. Those numbers represent the maximum capacity, the maximum assumed physical capacity that you have to either inject or extract. It's not that you're not injecting or extracting at that rate every day. That's just the highest rate at which you could extract or
Sir,
eject.
does that answer your question, sir?
Not really. It just seemed, and I might be missing something here, but it just seemed to me that some of the a couple of the key variables in your modeling may be driving, or may have the effect of driving the result, which is, hey, there's not enough capacity here to meet someone else's demand. And your conclusion was, this shows that Santa Cruz could not meet its demands and effectively share to meet, in the illustration you gave, SoCal's demands. And I just didn't understand completely whether there were certain inputs in your model which effectuates that results, and whether if you changed certain rules in your model, you might come out with a different answer. And I
think the short answer is no. I think the one thing that is the biggest constraint on, and it doesn't allow the city to meet SoCal's needs, is the fact that there's just not enough available water to divert in the streams. With the HCP flow rules that the city has agreed to with the state and federal agencies, that leaves it with only so much water that it's allowed to divert from the streams based on the climate change flow records or the historical flow records. And it just isn't enough.
You know, ultimately that was really a starting point for us to run the conference model and the groundwater model, but we are ultimately going to actually prove that in the field through actual pilot testing by having a set injection rate. In this case, it's 400 gallons per minute. You know, we showed a slide that showed us pilot testing at Bells 12, and it showed different injection, actually we only used one constant injection rate, 400 gallons per minute, but we varied the extraction rate. But ultimately, the pilot test will show whether or not we're able to inject anywhere close to that 400 gallons per minute rate, which is a little over half an MGD. So you will be proofing that in the field.
Well, just to follow up on John's comment, I mean, it seemed to me that the SoCal district folks would really be interested in the fact that these modeling results show that, you know, in half of the years this district would get its goal, 1,500 acre-feet per year. And so the question for you would be how to get it for the other half of the years, or close to 100% of the time. We know that there's enough water in the river on one really big day, that is equivalent to months of consumption. So it's not like there's not enough water in the river. The question is just, at what cost would it take, to treat the water, to convey the water, and so on. So I've been nudging you folks for years, hopefully gently, to pay a lot of attention to what would it take, to get your needs met. Does it need a larger intertie, for example? Does it need more turbid water treatment, or whatever? But that would be the question I would have if I were in your shoes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, we've identified certain wells that we ran through the model. The HB and the SC are wells within the City of Santa Cruz service area, and the SQ wells are wells within SoCal Cruz service area. We do have some estimated injection rates that are specific to that site, but on average, they're roughly 0.5 MGD, or a total of for the 6 wells of 3 MGD. In terms of recovery, we have an average recovery rate of 1 MGD per well, or a sort of total of 5.8 MGD. And again, this is sort of our first this is our first look at what a city ASR project would look like. So again, the sites can be moved around, but this is sort of our first starting point. So what you see here, and you probably saw a couple more in some of the material that you received but it's just sort of a typical outputs from the groundwater model that allows you to see what's happening at individual locations. In this particular case, we're looking at monitoring wells along the coast that are within Soquel Creek Water District service area. We are looking at just Purisima A wells. And you can see from this figure, you can see the 3 years of injection followed by a couple years of extraction. And the thing to highlight here is that you can see that the city's ASR project does drop below the initial baseline condition. So when we're recovering, we are dropping below baseline. And another thing to note is that we are dropping below some of the basin management objectives in a couple of different locations during our extraction periods.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, right now we're starting to get an idea of what both the city's project and Soquel's project would look like when combined, when they're both running at the same time in the basin. And we're also evaluating whether or not they would be helpful in terms of getting to sustainability. We just talked about when we kicked off the meeting here. You can really see the impact of both of these projects in these slides. Particularly, there isn't a lot of impact in the Purisima A formation, at least on or closest to the city's monitoring wells along the coast. And that's primarily due to the fact that the way the initial ASR was configured, there wasn't a lot of injection taking place in the A zone. A lot of it was really geared more towards the lower TU zone. And so that's why you really don't see a lot of impact in the Purisima A formation on these figures. So a future iteration could be that you could reconfigure the ASR project to have more of an injection in that A zone to help in this particular area. Again, very similar slide. We're just looking at different locations. Now we're looking at monitoring wells in Soquel Creek Water District service area. And you can really see sort of like the impact that the city's ASR project has in conjunction with Soquel Creek's Pure Water Soquel project. And again, this last slide this shows where you're really seeing the impact of an ASR project, and that's really in that TU. And again, that's primarily due to the fact that the initial configuration was targeting more that TU or that lower zone for injection and extraction. And so you're really seeing the impact there. So just really quick, some initial ASR and Pure Water Soquel findings. Adding city ASR to Pure Water generally does improve or help with sustainability. Again, this is based on the 5-year average graphs that we were just looking at. So you do see some improvement in Purisima A, which we really didn't see when we were just looking at the city's ASR only project. There is minor improvement in the city Purisima A, although not a lot, and again, primarily because these projects aren't really targeting that Purisima A, especially in closest to our service area. And a lot of the improvements can be seen in that lower TU zone. Something that we do see is that there is interference between both of their projects. So both of the projects are essentially competing for storage space. And so we do see some groundwater levels rise above groundwater surface in some of the injection well sites. Although we didn't show them, we are seeing that. So again, as I mentioned before, there is going to be a need to reconfigure ASR project and see how that one looks like when we run the water Soquel along it. So some future groundwater modeling scenarios, in addition to that reconfigured ASR project with Pure Water Soquel, we will be looking at locating different recovery wells for the INLU. One thing that we did learn was that INLU was not as efficient when compared to ASR. That was primarily due to the fact that our recovery wells were nowhere near the wells that were being turned off or that were turned off. So there is a disconnect between where you're essentially storing water and where you're recovering water, which makes sort of the INLU project a little bit less efficient when compared to ASR. Gary showed a couple of slides that looked at 3-year fill periods and 7-year fill periods. The modeling work that we've done to date is only based on a 3-year fill period. We could look at a different scenario where we are using a 7-year fill period and see what that looks like. And again, one of the questions is, we haven't looked at, what the basin looks like if you're recharging more than what the city needs. Right now, the thing that we've looked at is, okay, what does the basin look like if the city is recharging? We haven't gone beyond that in terms of bigger ASR projects. And then, there was a lot of discussion about climate change. So another scenario that would run would be a different climate change scenario. In this particular case, it would probably be a catalog scenario. We run climate change with the GFDL, but we potentially run it with the catalog approach. So just sort of summarizing some of the modeling work that we've done. Again, we talked about some of the assumptions. We started off assuming that we have some agreements with the district, and we do have an agreement to do some of the pilot testing for the Inlet piece. We also assumed that we would have an agreement to pilot test at different or existing production wells. Unfortunately, that wasn't feasible due to various operational concerns, and so we just focused on the city's Val 1212. And then based on some of the well siting study, we looked at having a need for X amount of wells. And based on that study, the wells that we determined that the ASR project needed, we determined that there is enough locations for us to site these ASR wells in both of the basins. Again, we started off assuming and able to get 3 billion gallons in both of these basins. And so far, based on the results for the scenarios, it looks like both of these basins would support a ASR project because we would be able to get the 3 billion gallons in them. But one thing that WSAC did not assume at the time was the pure water soak project and whether or not that would be occurring in the Mid-County Basin. As I mentioned, we are seeing that both of those projects are essentially competing for that storage space. And so we will be looking at a potential scenario where we're just not reconfiguring our ASR, but we're sort of focusing specifically in the city's service area. And so that would potentially help mitigate some of those higher water levels that we're seeing in those injection wells. In regards to some of the losses that were assumed, WSAC assumed a 20% loss for ASR, and they assumed a 40% loss for INDU. And right now we're seeing losses for both of those, INDU and ASR, in the range of 10 to 30%, where ASR is closer to 25%. But the losses vary depending on which climate change scenario you're running and which period of time that you're running. You ran it through the historical time period from 1985 to 2015, and that had a certain loss associated with it. We ran it from 1974 to 1985, and that had a certain loss, and it varied from, depending on the climatic years that you were running it through. But then again, in general, as I mentioned before, ASR was more efficient than INDU, and again, this is based on that disconnect between where you're ultimately recharging water and where you're extracting water. And then some of the assumptions regarding the injection capacities, we were looking at 0.3 MGD in the Santa Margarita Basin and 0.5 MGD in the Mid-County. And thus far, those extraction rates seem feasible. The groundwater modeling results show that, but also the pilot work that we're doing shows that we can essentially get roughly 400 gallons per minute into the groundwater basin. Ultimately, we'll probably be a little bit below 400 gallons per minute, but we'll be within range of that 0.5 MGD. And then in regards to basin sustainability, I think we've been able to recognize that the city's ASR project does not fully achieve basin sustainability, but it does help. So we are seeing a benefit to the ASR project in terms of seeing higher water levels when we're operating. And then, but we're also seeing that when we do extract some of that water, we are seeing instances where we are dropping below those sort of protective water level elevations or the corporate management criteria that's been established for basin sustainability.
Any questions from panel mic.
So, as Rick pointed out earlier, even if you can't totally meet the needs of, say, SoCal Creek Water District, there's at least the ability to produce some transfers out of the system, up to 50% of the time, or there's numbers to be worked on. Do we have anything like ballpark preliminary cost ideas about what it costs to produce water through the ASR and then new strategies versus Pure Water SoCal costs to produce stuff? I mean, I'm not looking for something that's defined, but I mean, even wild order of magnitude ideas about that?
So some very preliminary estimates of what it would cost us to produce 1 million gallons of water. Let's just talk about that. Our cost of production is going to be dramatically affected by the amount of money we're investing in the backbone infrastructure. And even financed over a 30-year period, the amount of revenue that we have to generate in order to support the debt is going to have to get distributed over all the water that we sell. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I would say that in terms of the comparison of numbers that I've heard for the SoCal project with, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 an acre foot, our costs are not likely to be cheaper than that. Okay, so other questions? Yeah.
Comments from Walt? Yeah, one request for additional information and then one comment. The first request is both with respect to in lieu, with and without, with respect to in lieu with and without ASR. We saw some examples where the system doesn't work. We can't quite make it work. And the request is if we could flip it and look at it a different way, which is to please present what a successful in lieu program would take in terms of flow rates and infrastructure, that is to actually make it work, and then maybe the best approach to implement that. So we had some places in the chart where things didn't work, and I think this request is, another way to look at that would be, what would it take to actually make it work and show that. That was a request, and then we also had a comment, which is, because leakage can get to 100% when outflow, that is to streams or the ocean, equals inflow, the observation is that implies that the actual groundwater capacity could be quite a bit below basin capacity. That's just a comment that was submitted as well. So I'll make sure we got those into the record.
So could I respond to the first one? I think that the issue with respect to in lieu, and this has been true, I think, since the WSAC conversations, is that the amount of demand to be offset, even if it's all of the groundwater areas in the proximity to us, San Lorenzo and Scotts Valley and SoCal, it's not big enough. The total demand is not big enough to get enough water in the ground to allow us to take the water that we need when we need it. Further, the slides that Isidro presented, looking at the operation of the big drawdown that we would need to take from groundwater stored, whether it's via ASR, in lieu, or some combination, indicate that operationally there are some constraints in how we can operate and still meet the basin sustainability criteria in the SoCal and the Mid-County Basin, where seawater intrusion is the major thing that has to be managed. Now, in the Santa Margarita Basin, it'll be a different set of issues and potential opportunities, but that work, that groundwater sustainability planning work, is just getting going now. They don't have to put their plan in until 2022. So I think that the challenge of sort of try to make it work is that realistically the math doesn't add up, number one, and number two, operationally there has to be 2 buckets of water. There has to be a bucket of water that addresses the seawater intrusion problem that SoCal has identified, and there has to be a separate bucket of water that can be operated by the city in a way that we need it to be operated to meet our drought need. And that there's not enough water in the cities to meet our needs and their needs. And operationally, we may have to modify what we're doing in order to make sure that we can operate whatever groundwater storage we have in the basin in a way that maintains the basin's sustainability criteria for seawater, protective levels for seawater intrusion. Okay. This is me, yeah. Okay, so while all this water supply augmentation work has been going on, simultaneously we've been looking at major investments in backbone infrastructure. We have, I don't know, this is 7. How many is this, Kevin? 7 projects? 6? It's $194 million for really a very small handful of these big projects is coming forward. Most of these projects are in the design stage, or some are getting ready to move towards certification of EIRs and getting ready to move out to. I've said to the staff, a number of these projects have left the terminal and they're taxiing down to the end of the runway and they're getting ready to take off. And so we've been sort of struggling, looking at what to do, because this is a lot of money. And we've looked at a couple of scenarios. On the next slide, you'll see a 350 versus a $300 million CIP. And what we've kind of concluded is that there are some places here that we probably have to move some things out, slow some things down. And the 3 areas that look to be the most likely are the Newell Creek Pipeline Rehabilitation Replacement, the Water Supply Augmentation Strategy, and the North Coast Pipeline, North Coast System, and the Laguna Majors Diversion Rehab. Those sort of pipelines that need to, that need work, but potentially could be done on a more incremental basis as opposed to a big project. Erica?
What is water supply augmentation?
That's the amount of money that's sort of in the budget for a water supply augmentation project, not specified what it is.
So it's all the WSAC stuff?
Yeah, it's the money that's available to develop.
Everything we're talking about today.
Additional supply. And the difference between these two has to do with where the numbers came from to give you a 300 versus 350. It has mostly to do with some very preliminary work we've been doing, just trying to get our arms around the projected rate increases associated with one versus the other. And we're not down, we haven't come down on a particular one at the moment, in part because, for example, Newell Creek Pipeline Rehabilitation Replacement is under a condition assessment right now. We'll have that money, or that result kind of in the summer or the fall. And depending on if we get some really, critical news about the reliability of sections of that pipeline, then we might say, we need to put something there. And, that's the difference between 15 million and say 30 million. But kind of in our heads where we are, and you'll see in the next slide, is it's basically the Budget Control Center, and it's like turn down the knob for the first 2 on the left, and because of the condition of the treatment plant and the issues associated with really, it's a critical facility. It's pretty much, 95% of every drop of water that goes to any customer goes through that plant, and it is definitely a plant that needs some TLC. We're kind of saying, these are the things that we think we need to push out, back off, do things a little bit more reactively than we might like, simply because there's probably not enough money to go around to do all of these things. So with that reality, I think we're moving right into the staff synthesis of, well, what do we think when we see all this data? And fundamentally, we think that we need to acknowledge that we have lower near-term demand, and near-term is probably 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, depending on, but it's not going to be 3.2 billion, it's not going to be 3.2 billion probably anytime really soon. We need to look for ways to improve supply reliability in ways that take advantage of the city's existing infrastructure as best we can, which means that for us, it makes sense to put energy into focusing on groundwater storage strategies of the belt system, because we have the infrastructure to deliver water to those areas. We have the infrastructure to bring water back into the system. So that's something that we think we could leverage. We need to leverage the reliability benefits of the planned treatment plant improvements, because between the reliability benefits of some work in the belt system and this, we can close the gap, even with the smaller 2.6 billion gallon demand. We have a gap that we need to fill, and we can make substantial progress in closing that gap by taking advantage of leveraging existing infrastructure and making sure we get the benefit of the treatment plant improvements. And then we need to really spend time between now and some additional future point, but probably not between now and 2020, really looking at what else we should be doing. And climate change needs to play a big role in our understanding of that with respect to really kind of understanding the degree to which surface water will be more or less or the same reliability, how surface water resources which we are dependent on are really going to be affected under a range of climate change scenarios. And looking at it both from the bottom up, like what kinds of climate impacts would really put us in a situation where surface water reliability is really threatened, and then from the top down, it's what do the models tell us about what kinds of things are happening out there in climate change projection land, which there are many. Here, we saw the slide earlier looking at just the sizing of the infrastructure changes between the various climate and historical flow conditions, injection and recovery capacity. And I think in the next couple of slides, you'll see some sizing of what happens with the size of the shortages if you use existing wells under historical flows, the GFDL 2.1 flows. And this would just be looking at ways of no ASR, you've seen those numbers before. If you use existing wells of 1.5 MGD injection and a 3 MGD extraction, it gets smaller, it's still big in the 320 million gallons over a peak season. Add some wells of different sizing. So you can see there's some really opportunities to close those gaps. And I think we have one more slide that has the other two climate scenarios on it. So this is what we think of when we see this whole little story as it's played out in all of the information we provided in the written documents and in the presentation tonight. And we're kind of seeing the opportunity before us as an opportunity to do some sort of off-ramp and some early actions from the WSAC sort of general direction, but not completely get off the main path, but extend out the main sort of timeline longer to give us chances to really look more carefully at the impacts of climate change and try to understand how those might influence what we should do if demand starts to grow back again and we get to a place where we think that we need another increment beyond what we can get into the belt system. I think then you go to, Heidi has some, there was quite a bit of stuff in the packet about some potential next steps. There were schedules. We're not really seeing a need to talk through those details. We wanted to show you that we had some things that were still out there that needed to be done, and we don't want to take the other options off the table, but we think that the next decision, if we take this sort of off-ramp and do the things that were listed there as the early actions, is a ways out. It's not in 2020, it might be in 2025, but it's a ways out both from a financial perspective and also from an information development perspective. I also think it gives us an opportunity during the next 2 or 3 years to work with the Santa Margarita Basin, which is just getting their groundwater sustainability plan up and running. And I think that opportunities for us to look for partnerships and other kinds of strategies in the Santa Margarita Basin might play very nicely into that planning process that is forthcoming.
Question, all the modeling with respect to extraction rates and saltwater intrusion and is kind of an average over the basin. If we're focusing just on belts in terms of injection and extraction and its proximity to the coast, would it be more vulnerable to saltwater intrusion? Would the loss rates be greater
Well,
than
I
the
think
20%?
there's a number of questions there, but the modeling that we did that you saw the results for is actually very specifically looking at the impacts at coastal monitoring wells, either in our system, so by Moran Lake, Pleasure Point, Soquel Point, or in the Soquel Creek area. So they're definitely coastal monitoring wells looking at what's happening with the groundwater levels so it's not spread out.
Okay.
And
It would be a similar profile.
There's an opportunity for us to think about reconfiguring our program to use the existing belts wells, and it might be very valuable for us to actually do some injection, even maybe a little bit more than extra or normal in the ones that are more proximate to the coast, because it could create a similar kind of seawater barrier that might occur there that would allow us to take more water from behind that, which is sort of what Soquel's proposing to do. Heidi?
Other questions from the panel right here? Before you,
Yeah.
actually, since we're kind of segueing into some of the next steps, question from the public related to one that may make sense in that context, which would be to evaluate the opportunities for surface spreading in the Santa Margarita Basin.
I guess what I would say about that is that definitely has some opportunities, and the work that will be done up there will look at that. I think that the benefits are much more likely to be to base flows, which is not a bad thing, but than to water supply.
Thanks.
So I think Rosemary summarized our next steps really well in terms of developing a modified work plan that looks at using existing infrastructure in our belt system, increasing the infrastructure, also continuing to look at the assumptions that are changing and how they would impact the questions asked. How do we know that demand's going to stay at 2.6 or is it going to increase? How do we know if we're in a drought or not? And how do we know when and how to respond? So we're going to be giving those things a lot of thought, including developing a work plan on the Santa Margarita Basin. We are still going to pursue how we're characterizing phase 2 of the recycled water work, which is to continue to look at the 5 different elements that the council asked that we look at. And in the next couple of months, June, August, September, we're going to be coming back to the Water Commission and these modified work plans. I think that is the end of this presentation.
I see now why it took us a year and a half.
Any other questions or comments from the panel? Rick?
Well, I just want to say I really support the direction that you described. It just makes a whole lot of sense to me to focus on repairing the essential infrastructure and upgrading it. And if I can be of any assistance in explaining to the public why their water rates are going up, I would be happy to do that.
Great. I'll hook you with Jeremy. That'll make him happy. Our finance director.
I think all of us were prepared to play a role in that. We put a lot of energy into understanding this, and we understand why other people might not instantly get it.
Other comments?
With that, I guess I'd open for public comment, and then we can come back and wrap up. So, John, you just want to do a public comment?
Well, no, I just was.
Well, hey.
Oh.
Are there folks who would like to make a public comment? Okay, so so we have a few.
Why don't you get people to really raise their hands and see what you're asking? I mean, you got some people starting to go up slowly. Is it 3 or is it 15?
And, okay, 5, okay.
7.
So again, we've got, remember, we got the 3-minute rule. Katie's going to be on the clock. We're going to be asking you to be cognizant of that during your speaking, since we're not going to have a buzzer and I'm not going to go banging the gavel. we're going to be polite and respectful. And I saw John first, so John, if you want to go.
Yeah, I just, my takeaway here, and I just wanted to see if it's correct, is that by making the infrastructure improvements, because of the demand thing, the issue that's down, and the way we're actually managing the system, our gap, it looks like we can achieve water security for Santa Cruz for the foreseeable future.
We can make a really big dent in that.
Yeah, and then we're going to be checking that in iterations. The second thing I get out of this, and I don't want to have this challenge because it's incorrect, if we had a different configuration here in water management, in terms of the districts being, not two districts, but with Soquel and Santa Cruz, we'd basically come out the same way. That's what I'm hearing.
I guess what I would say, John, is the really important thing that Gary said, that in terms of volumes available for who can get what, is it's the fish flows that we've agreed to. That really is driving what water is available for us to meet our own needs and potentially partner with others.
I'll take that as a yes.
We'll come back. So, any other members of the public? Candace?
Yeah, my comment's brief. Since it's obvious that pricing might have an impact on demand, and there's sort of this rubber band that, it's a key element as to whether you can get enough money into your budget to do some of these things and reprioritize. Just to what extent that's part of the model is my question, and you don't have to answer that now, but that's just more of a comment also.
Well, you may recall that one of the reasons that we had David Mitchell work with us during the WSAC process was because he developed a demand model for us that did include price elasticity of demand.
Mm-hmm.
And the rates we actually moved to weren't right at the time he did it, so we made some assumptions that were then later overtaken by events. But I guess the thing I would say, a lot of the demand, particularly in the residential sector, has switched from or moved down from the higher tiers, such as they are, into the lowest tier. And as reflected by sort of the level of demand that we're seeing, what we're assuming is that price elasticity is bigger in the higher tiered areas where people are using it more discretionary uses. It gets less, it doesn't go away completely, but it gets smaller when you get more to the indoor use where people are, they're taking a 5-minute shower and they're really not going to go to a 3-minute shower in order to save whatever, right? So I think that we will be, as Toby mentioned, looking at an updated demand forecast. It will be one of the major elements of the work we'll have to do starting next year when we have to start working on an updated urban water management plan. So that's definitely going to get looked at, and we'll be working in the same way that we did before, looking at that econometric model.
I'm concerned about several things. 3 billion gallons magic number, about the size of the lot, about the size of Santa Cruz demand. Of course, we heard it was half a billion gallons less than that tonight. Did I get that right? 2.5 billion? Is the demand right about now, and maybe going for a while. That difference in demand, half a billion gallons, is what Pure Water Soquel could provide. So maybe it's not so necessary. What can we do to recalibrate in light of that half a billion gallons already being available that we didn't seem to account for, at least I didn't, for tonight? The other thing is, the 3 billion gallons, it was stated years ago, and Gary, it gives us 8 years of being drought proof, at least there you are. And I think the number might have changed a little bit, but storing retrievably 3 billion gallons makes us drought-proof for 8 years. And I don't.
No, that's not right.
All right, well, what is the number? How many years?
Well, we saw that storing up to that much will maybe get us through a 2-year drought or a 3-year drought, not an 8-year drought. If we have an 8-year sustained severe drought, we're toast.
So you're changing the statement that you made in WSAC?
No, he's not.
No, I'm not.
You misunderstood it.
Never made that
But
statement.
there was a process where we looked at the 76, 77, and the 87, 92 drought that came back to back. That was just looking at how bad the drought would be and what the recovery would be. But that was never what was used to develop the gap. The gap was looking at in the, whether it was the historic or the GFDL 2.1, what the actual worst conditions were in that situation. And the GFDL 2.1 was 1.2 billion gallons against a 3.2 billion gallon demand. So, and that was a 2-year drought. You can see the numbers in that document he showed you that showed the amount, and the CMAP 5, the forum ensemble had a 3-year worst case drought. That's why there's 3 years.
So, then please correct my numbers. So we put away retrievably 3 billion gallons. We're immune to how many years of drought?
The 2-year worst case drought, or the 3-year worst case drought, in the various scenarios that we're running.
Okay. I'll take that into account for future things. There's a belief that when we're not shipping water to SoCal, they're shipping water to us. Actually, there's several stages in between. One of them is we're shipping to less than we normally would. That's a very important and big middle ground. As the rainfall lessens and lessens, we're still filling SoCal's aquifer and making them more immune to saline incursion, just not as a higher rate as we would in a wet year or a normal year. The other thing is we probably take it from Scotts Valley next, and we probably take it from our own aquifer first before we take it from SoCal. So the big fear about SoCal all of a sudden being sucked dry, I think may be exaggerated in some people's minds, and I hope we take a more critical look at that. But things may be better than that. Also, I believe that the available aquifer space, not for what we call reliable supply every year, but usable nevertheless, is several times the lot.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. I have some more folks over here. Anybody else?
I'll go with it, that's fine.
There may not be a leader. All right.
Well, Becky wants to.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. My name's Becky Steinbrunner. I really appreciate all this information. And I want to point out that there have also, thank you, that there has been information shown that the groundwater levels in the Prisma aquifer along the coastal monitoring wells have actually risen to historic highs. And I think that information wasn't really accommodated in this study. I think it's interesting that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the in-lieu wouldn't really work because the demand of SoCal Creek isn't enough to really bank that amount that the city would need. And that seems an odd thing to me, and I'm wondering if that assumption is based on the total demand of SoCal Creek Water District. If the district were to shut off all of their wells and get the bulk of their water or all of their water during the wet season, provided that the intertie were enlarged, provided that there were improvements to deal with high turbidity water, could that look like a different picture? I also want to point out that Mr. Cameron Tanna from what is now Montgomery and Associates did say in the Pure Water SoCal modeling enrichment for the GSP, Mid-County Groundwater GSP Advisory Commission Enrichment Program, he did say that in lieu would be a much more effective way to address seawater intrusion because it offers much more flexibility. You could shut off wells in areas where the seawater, perhaps rate of seawater is intruding higher, or if at all. I might point out that there's only been an increase in chloride shown at the Pleasure Point within the Prisma aquifer. It's a different story in the Aromas aquifer. But Pure Water SoCal really doesn't affect the Aromas aquifer, only in that the intertie has been established so that wells down there could be shut down a little bit more. And I guess that's the bulk of my comment here, that I think there is great hope for the two areas, the two municipalities working together. And I also want to thank Mr. Longinati for pointing out that in some of the models there, 100% of the use could be supported historically with what we have here, using surface water in transfers. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you for all that you do. Thank you. Because it's a huge time commitment. It's one of the most, if not, it's one of the most important things that, one of the most important issues that we face is whether we have that in the future. I just, I'm a member of the Bruce Jaffe, SoCal Creek Water District Director. I'm speaking for myself, not speaking for SoCal Creek. One of the things that's impressed me going through the whole process, being part of the MGA and NGA's Sustainable Groundwater Plan Advisory Committee, is we're connected, very, very connected. And it's really encouraging to me to see how that's in everyone's consciousness. And I can assure you, the next 3+ years when I'm the director, I'm going to do everything in my power to think regionally and to help wherever possible, not only SoCal Creek, but Santa Cruz as well. So the bottom line is that for me, my whole approach to this with the uncertainty of climate change is plan for the worst and hope for the best. So, but I want to thank everyone who's part of this process because it's a huge time commitment and it's so important.
I'm Ron Milton, I'm the general manager of the SoCal Creek Water District. I remember being in this room 2 to 3 years ago and you guys were pounding it out like twice a month and there'd be food here and I could see the sweat and the tears to some degree. And I think we all have the same goal, right? Solve the drought shortage, solve the seawater intrusion issue. And I think and this is really complicated stuff. I have a hydrology background. I don't know how somebody off the street digests all this. I even get confused. I have to call up and ask questions myself. So I really give it to you for sticking it out. But what I see, we've been seeing this coming. I remember about a year ago, Rosemary said, "Do you want us to run the models to see how much water is left over that could supply SoCal Creek?" And we said, "Absolutely. That's a given. Do it." And you've done it. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, City of Santa Cruz. And we had some insight to what was coming down the pike. But I think what we see is not one project is going to solve Santa Cruz's issues, and not one project is going to solve the seawater intrusion and sustainability issues. I think that's very clear tonight. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It looks like you have excess water maybe during some times under some climate models, and that's a really wonderful thing. So what I would suggest,
I think back up, we have a mantra at Soquel Creek, it's don't fall in love with the project, fall in love with sustainability. And we mean that because people tend to get latched onto something. And I commend you for trying to solve your problem and ours too. That's been in your veins since day one. And thank you for that, because if it could be done, we would say, let's do it. I don't think that's the case, and I think that's what we're seeing. So my suggestion to us is, how do we move forward knowing what we know now? It's not going to be a one, it's going to be an and, two projects of magnitude. So how do we continue, and I say continue, to embrace that and move forward and work together as a community as a whole?
Looks like that wraps it up for public comment. Thank you all. I just want to bring it back to the panel just for some wrap-up discussion. There's not a motion tonight. This is an informational item. But I think maybe some either members of the commission or honorary members of the commission may have some either final questions or final thoughts. So, David, you do it.
Yeah. First of all, on our work list, because I didn't get a clear picture of it, as we are sort of shifting gears and with the information from Gary about the confluence model and from Toby about what our shortages could look like, if demand is not rebounding, that could also have the consequence that if we have some drought years, it could be harder to get savings through rationings or conservation because people haven't destroyed their use. So I would hope that Toby will do some analysis of that for us so we can get an idea of what things might look like in years of low rainfall and drought years, so that we can look like what rationing programs might look like and what kind of conservation measures are left that people will be able to do when we have to institute things on an emergency kind of basis.
What I see right now is a need for 6 MGD day in, day out. It's a floor that we can't go below. We need to provide basic water for basic needs. I don't see that lower. That leaves 400 million gallons, or 15%. That is all that's left in that low peak that Gary showed. That's all that's left is 15%. If the state, or I said do the city, you have to cut back 30%. We're already into that 6 MGD. We are very low right now. And it's going to take something different, something really different to achieve the kinds of cutbacks. Think about where we've been over a period of many, many years and what people have done and where we are now. But I think it's a necessity that the system have a solid 6 MGD for emergencies, for daily needs, for here on out. And to Mike's point earlier, that may increase over time, depending on what happens in this county. That's how I see it now. So the trick is, and the art will be, if we ever did face that before we solve this problem, what would we do?
Well, that's the question I'm asking you to flesh out.
Well, I have had this conversation with Toby about the 2009 watershed contingency plan, which was based on water use patterns that were probably in 2005, 6, 7, era. That's not what it looks like now. And so it is a big deal, and we'll have to update that plan for the next urban water management plan. It's a big deal for us to think about where would you get a 10 or 15 or 20 or 25% cut when the water consumption looks the way it looks in this community.
And then my other comment, I want to say, especially to my former WSAC members who are not on this commission, I'm sorry for what you just got put through now. I've been on the water commission under my 8th year. Having done WSAC, I'm also on the Blue County Groundwater Agency and on its Plan Advisory Committee. I've been learning more about water than I ever thought I ever would, and I still don't understand it. And the different models have different purposes, and that has to be kept in mind because Gary's model is not a model that talks at all about basic sustainability for the county groundwater basin. It talks about sufficiency of our water supply from our surface water sources and how we might allocate that. The other modeling work has been done, and it wasn't emphasized as much tonight, but really there's a regional symbiosis going on. The information that we've been receiving indicates that the mid-county groundwater basin Basin will actually perform best as a place where we can locate ASR in the Bells Field if there is pure water SoCal creating the seawater barrier and SoCal Creek is relocating their wells a little bit inland to take advantage of that, and to take advantage of the recovery that they get by having the salt water in there as a barrier. So the notion of regional symbiosis is very much key to what we've got going on right now, and I don't think that should get lost. Also, how much money is driving. When we were doing WSAC, we could put a $250 million price tag on an ASR project, and great, okay, well, where's that going to come from? Who knows? Well, what we now know is that where it's going to come from is the rehabilitation of the Loch Lomond Dam outlet, that it's going to come from the water treatment plant that we need to update. It's going to come from so much infrastructure that it needs to be redone that you can't really believe it. And what that's going to translate to for ratepayers could be absolutely oppressive if we were to implement things the way we would like to achieve water sustainability. So that's not an insignificant driver of what is going on here.
I wonder if a big thank you to everybody. First, a really big thank you to everybody, the water department staff, and also all the other associated people who are working on this. So thank you so much. And I completely see the very urgent need to rehabilitate Grand Hill. And as far as the demand forecast goes, I just want to observe the city does have a lot of things coming down the pipeline. There's that new project right by off of Laurel between Pacific and the front that's coming in. That's a pretty large project coming in. There's an Ocean Street development project where the city basically said we aren't concerned about the extra water they approved the project anyway, even though it goes beyond their demand projections that were allowable. PUCSC is looking towards having new housing built. So I just am kind of putting that out there as a caution to really observe that we really do have a lot of projects coming down the pipeline. So that may not be that 2 to 5 year forecast that you're observing, but I'm just observing.
So just a comment on the longer term demand forecast, the 3.2 billion had room in it for those projects, the kinds of projects we were talking about there, and obviously they haven't hit right now, so we would expect to see some increase in but the university growth, the kinds of development that we were anticipating, you could see it even in the short-term demand, because that when it didn't happen, it resulted in 25% of why the demand was down. So I think that the good news from my perspective is there's a way for us in the near term to make some improvements, and assuming that we have some kind of reasonably sustainable surface water over time, we can maintain those as sort of block one of what we might need to get to. And that's why I think that the near-term strategy is so important to go ahead with, because we can close the gap as it exists, and then there might be something in addition that has to be done, but that's going to happen a little bit further out. That's how I see it.
I just want to say that this is really helpful. I assume that all the members of WSAC pay attention to this issue. I mean, I can't imagine any of us after all that work done ever look into what's going on in the water issues for the city and the region. But I got a level of information just for this. I read the material that was presented. It's very thick to go through it, and I know a lot more now than I did before I came to this meeting. I think I understand sort of where we're at. I can see the things that I don't get, that none of us know yet, that we need to know in the next couple of years. But you should do more of these rather than fewer. This is really, really helpful. And having people in the community who are not sitting, as Katie was saying, not sitting on the Water Commission, studying this stuff in detail every day, kind of critical to be able to move forward with what you want to do in the short term. So I appreciate the presentation, the level of information and detail. And it is, I think you made it accessible to lay people, because I consider myself that even after a year and a half of study. I'm not a hydrologist, you know?
I just want to echo the appreciation from the staff laying out the data. I mean, I expected, being on the Water Commission, that we would have seen pretty much everything that was in this packet that we got, but the way that you presented it, I think really led to a logical conclusion. So I think that was really helpful for me. I have a pretty specific question about the Santa Margarita Basin. I know it's part of the near-term effort, but my understanding is that the infrastructure that would be necessary to be able to access that basin in terms of transfers or in lieu or whatever else we might want to do with their injection and recovery would really be prohibited. So I'm kind of questioning why that's kind of on the near-term list.
No, it's not. It's I think that I said it's on the near-term list in terms of looking at opportunities for working together with the basin up there to think about groundwater sustainability over time. But you have a 20-year time frame to implement your plan. So we could put some ideas on the table, and if we get the right kind of partnership, it doesn't require you to do the work. But I think that just because we're engaged with the other parties in the Santa Margarita groundwater sustainability plan, there's opportunity for that cross-fertilization.
Okay, so it's the engagement.
Yeah,
continue.
That's what's on the near-term.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just the final comment on the CIP. I think the 300 million, just correct me if I'm wrong, comes from the long-range financial plan, the 10-year long-range financial plan, but it's not really a fixed number,
No,
right?
there was in the financial plan that was included in the packet, the number at that time was 297 million. But who's counting the?
I count this.
Oh, 3 million.
But the certain things about that estimate have changed somewhat dramatically. Like pretty much the list of projects that we're contemplating were in there, but the amount that was associated with them has changed somewhat dramatically. So that number is actually a bigger number than 300 million. The same stuff that was in the earlier version, which is why some of it needs to get pushed out.
If we make the same assumptions about the rate increases.
Right. Yeah.
But we could make different assumptions if we wanted to have a 350 million.
Yes, we could, and we would have to make different assumptions about those things.
Right.
And that'll be, just like
Coming.
2016 was, I joke about it, when I got here in 2014, there was no water, there was no money, there was no plan. But by the end of 15, there was a plan and there was water, although I didn't have anything to do with the water. And then 16 was all about the money, and it's going to be all about the money again next year.
Toby, waterless toothbrush.
So I don't really have any questions. I just want to thank you for the really elegantly assembled packet. It was very long, but once you kind of were able to get into it, there was a beautiful flow to it. It really synthesizes everything that's been happening in these meetings and in the Mid-County Groundwater Agency meetings. Kind of cherry-picked all the kind of key information and put it together. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went behind this. And I also really appreciate the pragmatism of your kind of moving forward with starting with the obvious things that are easily achievable and that we have now modeled and that make the most sense, and then building from there over time as we get more information. I think that's a really wise approach rather than diving into something unnecessary or uneducated just for the sake of doing something. So I'm very supportive of everything that you guys put together.
I too want to thank you for a great summary. It's gratifying to see that there's progress being made after all the effort that has gone into this. I come away with two realities. One is that the technology or technologies that were proposed are coming to fruition. They seem very likely and possible. But the economics, as David pointed out, we were throwing around a couple $100 million here or there like it was nothing, and the economic realities are stark. And while the technology, proving the technology is very encouraging, the economics are really discouraging. And it's a concern as rates continue to increase. revenue is going to decrease with lowering demand. The good news is people are using less water. The bad news is you're taking in less revenue.
Yeah, the fixed cost system too, so.
So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
The more we prove we can do, the less able we are to do it because of economics.
I think one of the things on the financial side that has really emerged for me in the last, say, 6 months is this whole idea that we need to be, working very aggressively with potential sources of grant, or certainly we're going after the low interest loans from the State Revolving Loan Fund federal program that's called WIVIA, which stands for Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. But so we're going after those kinds of things. But I think that to the extent that funds can be made available for some of the backbone infrastructure pieces, it will make a huge difference in the form of grants as opposed to just loans. And so that's a major focus, and will be for me going forward over the next couple of years, trying to figure out how to get some money in here that will mitigate some of these impacts.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had one last question, Rosemary. There was, in the packet, you talked about the water rights project. We didn't talk about it a whole lot tonight. Just the hanging question there is when.
So the notice of preparation for the water rights project was put out, I think it was November. We got comments on that, and we are in the process of working on the EIR for that project. It will be coming out in the fall, I believe, right? And so once the final EIR is prepared and certified by the council, then that project can go to the state board for processing. We had some very positive responses from state board members for what we were proposing. The state board has turned over quite a bit in just the last 6 months, so we're planning on some additional meetings with folks on the state board, but I think that in general we're feeling very optimistic that, particularly as it relates to the changes in the places of use and some of the other sort of cleanup amendments that we asked for that have been pending since 2006, really, that we are very optimistic that we'll be able to make those changes.
And I spoke to Jim has a question.
Actually, an observation. Here on the, this is a great package, by the way, with an awful lot of detail. That's much appreciated. On the Water Commission, we're focused completely on water, but water is tied to everything in the city. Our demand has not recovered as we expected it to recover, and 25% of that is new connections that we have. We have a city council that's talking about one of the highest priorities is a lack of housing and cost of housing. If they're successful in increasing housing, that will increase connections and that will increase demand. It may not happen this year, but it's an issue. Multiple issues around town are tied together, and they do link to water. We have to plan an infrastructure that addresses a future that touches all those points. And it is challenging. It will be expensive. And I don't see that we have a lot of choices when we have, for example, a treatment plant that has to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, had a 30 to 40 year design life, and it's more than 50 years old. It gets expensive, and we have to find a way to do it. Just that comment.
Yeah, the one thing I think is really potentially not to be overlooked is that, there hasn't been supply development for the city since probably Newell Dam was built, and that's 1960. So if we are successful in moving to, use existing infrastructure to start to actually create some kind of aquifer for storage and recovery, and possibly some kind of water sharing with SoCal, if there's, a way that we can do that, as well as having them do what they need to do, then I think that's a major milestone that we haven't had in this community for more than 50 years. And we've been talking about this problem in a variety of ways. So even though if it doesn't solve the whole problem, it's one heck of a big step to take to start building the capacity that we need to make sure that we do have water reliability and water security in this community. So I think that shouldn't be forgotten.
Agreed.
And with that,
So I suggest we take a 5-minute break or 10 minutes while we